Good afternoon. This is Clark Neighbors with BIS Commodities out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, with a market summary for the week ending February 19, 2016. As far as grains are concerned, we continue with the quiet tone, a little firmer this week in a very choppy, modest trade. Corn up for the week 7-8 cents, beans up 8 to 10 cents for the week, so one of the better weekly closes we have seen some time, but again, very quiet. Macros seem much more subdued also this week. The DDs, or the dollar, and the Dow seem to have quieted down as outside economic events and policy, money policies, etc. More headlines this week. Keep in mind the next major crop report, supply and demand in early March, but the next major crop report is March 31st, which will be the planting intentions report, stocks report. So that's still 6 weeks away. We do have a USDA outlook meeting here later this month, which may give some early indications on planted acres and that type of thing. In the grains, basis as a general rule had a weaker tone this week, probably more so in the corn than the beans, but both feel that movement has been a little better, seeing some basis actually back off. And in saying that, and considering we have deliveries against the March only a week away, spreads have tightened in this week with that softer basis. So we can still continue to see a location scenario come with values on the northern Illinois, or into the delivery market, if you will, still firm enough values to keep these spreads somewhat snug. But considering the fundamentals, considering the export trade, especially on corn, doesn't all make a lot of sense. In some ways, you could say the spreads make about as much sense right now as some of the presidential caucuses. Quick survey. We'll have some more information on this hopefully in the next week or two. From the Western Corn Belt, the amount of crop the farmer has sold or has left to sell. In the Western Corn Belt, from what we can pick up talking to different commercial or elevators, that the farmer still has half to maybe as much as 3/4 of his corn left to sell. Beans, a little less than half. In the Eastern Corn Belt, i.e. east of the Mississippi River, something less than half of the corn left to sell, and a little less beans from a percentage standpoint. So there's still a tremendous amount of inventory to move, especially in the Western Corn Belt where the crop was bigger this year, and then also in those surveys asking how much new crop has been sold. The answer is typically zero. The other thing that tends to pop up out in the country, talking to country elevators, is the tremendous amount of basis contracts that have been written in the Midwest. Nothing wrong with these contracts, other than I think producers need to be aware of the pitfalls. They are at 100% risk on board movement with the basis contracts, so need to be cognizant of board activity and timeliness of pricing. So going forward, as far as the grains are concerned, we're kind of in that dull time of year, and until we get into talking about new crop or the growing season, we're probably more in the same here short term. But once we start talking about the growing season, weather, then we presumably could add a little volatility to a market that has very little volatility right now. In fact, corn options, I think, at the lowest volatility we've seen in 10 years. Beans, basically the same thing. A number we like to watch, if you look at since the market went to these new price levels back in 2006, almost 10 years ago is when this started. It takes the market several years or several growing seasons to figure out maybe where that middle of the road or that equilibrium value is. And interestingly enough, not to say this is the way it's going to be from this point going forward, but if you draw a line on corn at about 440, if we have carryout in corn $1.5 billion or larger, maybe more specifically 1.6, 1.7 billion or larger, like we do this year, we tend to have corn below that 440 mark. Just depends on how much. On the other side of the coin, if carryout's below 1.5, or maybe more specifically below like a 1.2 billion carryout, then you have the price of corn something above 440. So if you take that assumption, what would it take to get carryout down in that 1.2 area? And without doing real detailed numbers as far as supply and demand, keeping things pretty much in line with last year, you would need a nationwide yield somewhere around 160 bushels an acre or less to presumably get that carryout down in that kind of environment. So something to keep in mind going forward as producers. The timeliness of making some not only old crop sales, new crop sales in the spring and the summer this year could be more key. We'll just have to see going forward. But keep in mind with this low option volatility, you can use that somewhat to your advantage to sell cash corn and or beans and possibly buy some fairly low volatility options right now to replace that. Please talk to your broker if you want more details on that. But again, all in all, the grain market's very, very quiet. We did have a cattle on feed report this afternoon for all cattle, 100%, right in line with last year. Placements at 99%, pretty much in line with what the trade was looking for. Marketing's at 98%, pretty much right in line with the market. So very neutral on the surface cattle on feed report. But cattle market is not neutral, not quiet, different than the grains, obviously. Volatility continues to be huge. Limit moves were in the cards this week. They did happen. We're up about $5 on the week for cattle this week with basically no cash trade yet at this point. So considering the news and everything, beef prices lowest level since first of the year. The anticipation of better cash obviously is there with the board action like that. We'll have to see. But all in all, fairly quiet. Please get some consideration as a producer on locking in some of this old crop corn, getting some sort of a game plan put together for new crop corn as we get into the early part of the growing season. With that, everybody have a great day. Feel free to call us here in Cedar Rapids. Phone number is 800-373-2525 or BIScommodities.com.